So you want to start your first planted tank, but everything is so expensive. The lights, substrate, the plants themselves. Keep watching as I share 5 ways you can cut costs and stay below that tight budget. Hi, my name is Irene with Girl Talks Fish, here with practical tips on nanofish and planted aquariums. And the fact of the matter is, aquariums are expensive. Even if you're trying to start a normal aquarium, but you are going from scratch, you don't know anything, so you gotta buy it all brand new, you're looking at about $200, $250 at least. Now make that a planted tank and we might be talking about double the cost. So let me talk about 5 areas where it might be feasible to cut some costs and make that poor man's aquascape happen. So tip number 1 is, of course, to go with used equipment. You can buy everything from, the tank, the light, the heater, the filter. You might want to do a little research online first to see if you like the brands you see, but otherwise it's a pretty cool way to, get stuff from hobbies and continue using it. Now, if possible, you want to check the items. So for example, if there's a light, have them plug it in, make sure it works. If everything is in a box, make sure to open the box. I unfortunately did a Craigslist buy once for a canister filter, and I think it was supposed to be rated for 100 gallons. I didn't open it up. The guy was super friendly. I know, stupid. When I got home, I found out it was the model for a 50-gallon aquarium, and he hadn't even cleaned it out. This was a saltwater tank. There was rotting, stinking seaweed in there. It was so gross. Definitely a lesson learned there. I also wouldn't buy any used heaters just because they're already prone to failure anyways, and you don't know how people treated it. Like a lot of times they'll run that heater dry while they're doing a water change and forget all about it. And so, yeah, I definitely had a $5 heater that I had in a quarantine tank, and my husband was like, is there supposed to be rust coming from this thing? And I was like, what? So thankfully I was able to save the fish, but never again. Finally, if you can't test the equipment while you're there, obviously when you bring it home, you want to fill any used tanks with water, check it for leaks for 24 hours, as well as any equipment. Go ahead and run it for 24 hours to make sure that everything is, kosher and working properly before you put any fish in it. Tip number 2 is to go cheap with the substrate. So something like a sand. Now, this is kind of controversial, so you definitely want to do your research on planted tank forums about the pros and cons. The cons are sand obviously can make your water very cloudy. Maybe the particles will go up into your filter motor if you don't have a pre-filter sponge. Things like maybe the particles are too fine and it's not easy for the plants to grow roots into it. However, the pros are you can't get any better than like $10 for a 50-pound bag of sand. And it's pretty nice, especially if you need to fill up 2 to 3 inches of substrate in a very, very large aquarium, right? Now, some of the most common options you'll hear mentioned include pool filter sand. So I think most people recommend something like the number 20 or number 30 grade silica sand. It comes in lots of different colors, but if you're looking for something that might hide the fish waste and the mulm a little better, go for like a mottled tan color. The other cheap option you hear about is diamond blasting sand. Now, this is a little iffy because some people say that the particles are really sharp. Others are like, no, it doesn't matter. I've used it for years and my fish have never had problems. So again, do your own research. It comes in a beautiful black color usually, and a lot of people recommend getting the 20/40 grade medium grit. Now I have a whole video over here on how to use sand with a planted tank, but just some quick tips off the top of my head. Rinse it thoroughly to get rid of any loose silt that's floating around. You don't want that cloudy water problem. Get a pre-filter sponge again to protect your filter from any motor burnouts and sand getting sucked up. If you are using an algae scrubber, be very careful not to accidentally capture any grains of sand in the scrubber. Otherwise, you're gonna scrub a nice big long scratch all across your glass or acrylic pane. And finally, sand is inert, so you may need to put root tabs or other kind of ground fertilizers in there if you're planting Amazon swords, cryptocorynes, or other plants that feed heavily from the roots. Tip number 3 is to get cheap gravel and rocks from your local landscaping store. It's going to be a lot cheaper than an aquascaping store for sure. And yes, plants actually can grow in gravel as well. Now gravel is going to come in all sorts of sizes and colors. You probably want to look for something that's like a little bit rounder gravel, just in case you have bottom dwellers. You don't want their whiskers or barbels getting cut up. And then also you want to make sure the individual pebbles aren't too big where they're more like river rocks or individual rocks, just because the plants need something a little bit smaller for their roots to grow in and kind of grab onto. As for rocks, there are some rocks that are inert and safe for aquariums, and there are others that may change the pH or water hardness or mess with the water chemistry of your tank. So you wanna, when you go to the landscaping store, that's what I love about it. They usually label exactly what the rocks are, and then you can Google to see whether or not they're aquarium safe. Now, if you are a rock identifying wizard, feel free to go out into nature, get those free rocks, as long as you're allowed to in that area. Maybe just avoid rocks in areas next to major roads or areas where they're probably spraying pesticides and herbicides. Same as with the sand substrate, once you take your gravel and rocks home, go ahead and rinse in water, get rid of any of that excess silt or loose particles so that you won't have problems with cloudy water. Tip number 4 is how to save money on plants and driftwood. And at least for me, I tend to look at local fish club auctions or maybe hobbyists that live in the area, which is the best, especially when it comes to plants, because those plants are usually grown in similar water parameters as your own, so they won't maybe melt back as much when you put them in your own aquarium. A lot of local hobbyists are very willing to help new people entering the planted tank hobby, and they'll often throw together a gallon-sized Ziploc bag full of plant trimmings from their stem plants or floating plants, and they'll sell you or even give away mixed salad bags of plants, basically. Very, very cheap way to start with your first planted tank. Obviously right now during the pandemic, it's a little harder to meet with people in person, so you can also consider looking online, finding those really good deals in auctions and plant stores that sell and ship to you. As for looking in nature, there are definitely people who collect plants and wood from their local vicinity. It's a lot easier, I feel like, to sanitize a piece of driftwood. However, you can potentially bring back a lot of parasites and pathogens from plants that were in your local pond or lake or waterways. For example, I heard some horror stories of someone collecting some local pond plants, and then, their aquarium ended up having a bunch of leeches as well as dragonfly nymphs, which can eat smaller fish. Ugh. I have a whole video over here on how I've used alum to safely treat plants and get rid of snails and snail eggs. So I don't know if it would work on those kinds of insects and worms, but it's worth a shot. So if anybody tries it, let me know down in the comments. Area number 5 where you can save on money is aquascaping tools. Now I know it looks really cool when you see those professionals with their whole kits. Honestly, if you really want to, you can just use your fingers and your hands. There's no need to have a substrate spatula. Just use your hand to smooth out the substrate or use your fingers to plant them. I've actually seen a really cool tutorial for making a DIY set of tweezers/tongs. You just get some cheap old Chinese takeout chopsticks, insert something that's like waterproof, like maybe a piece of another chopstick in between, rubber band the end of it, and then it will just snap together like that, which is really cool. A lot of times I just use a regular pair of scissors, and then for scraping algae off, I just buy a cheap pack of razor blades. I just feel like I have a lot more control and I can get out those tougher algae that are harder to remove. Now I want to include an honorable mention section just because I know some of you out there are like, Irene, why didn't you mention organic soil that's capped with sand or gravel? It's just a little more challenging, complicated. It's not for me, honestly, and it's not for a lot of beginners, especially when I feel like there's a lot of more beginner-friendly substrates out there, just because dirt plus water equals mud. I personally like to move around my plants a lot because I make mistakes or I buy new plants, and that can release a lot of cloudiness and muddiness into the water that's hard to remove. And then even though it has great nutrients in the soil, eventually that does get used up as well. So you either have to replace all of the soil, which is a big mess, or insert in root tabs into the substrate, which you have to do anyways with inert substrates. So if you want the challenge and you like playing with mud, go for it. It's all yours. Another thing I wanted to put in honorable mention is DIY fertilizers. It absolutely is much cheaper to buy your own powders, each of the different nutrients, and mix them up yourself. It's just a bit of a more advanced technique. Again, like the dirted tanks, where you just gotta be careful. You're the one controlling the right ratio of the nitrogens and potassiums and phosphates, and if you don't put it together right, you could run into issues where your plants aren't growing well or you have massive algae issues. I know some companies, I believe, sell pre-mixed packages of powders. So again, you mix it up yourself, add water, put it in your own bottle, and then you dose it accordingly. There are also ways to make DIY root tabs as well. I believe Osmocote is one of the more popular ones. Do your research on that. A lot of people say it's safe for aquariums. Other people, they're saying, I tried it and it got into the water column. I had ammonia spikes, nutrient spikes, and it caused all sorts of havoc in my aquarium. So it comes with its own risks. So now that I've covered the top 5 tips and tricks about saving money, I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. I love saving money, but on the other hand, I'm not a crazy DIYer like some of these guys on the forums. So I personally like buying brand new products, but maybe just waiting until they're on sale. So the reason for that is I've just gotten burned too many times where I bought things used and then 50% of the time they end up breaking, or I end up needing to fix it buying parts that really end up being the cost of buying a brand new unit. So I just like being able to save up and pay for exactly what I want, having it being brand new, and then I can return it to the store if it's broken and needs replacement. Now, I want to hear from you what your top tips and tricks are for saving money on a first planted aquarium where you don't have a lot of extra parts lying around to use. So let me know down in the comments and I would love to learn from you. Take time to enjoy your aquariums, and I'll see you in the next video.